The federal government has grossly overstepped its boundaries from its original purpose. Since its inception, it has grown and spread until it invades every aspect of our lives. With such a diverse population from literally every corner of the earth, there is no way a single law or solution coming from this entity can work for such a wide variety of people, such as lives in these United States. The sheer number of laws and regulations boggles the mind. It would be impossible for any single human being to learn, much less comprehend or understand, this extensive body of legislation. This fact should make it very clear that unintended consequences from these laws are not only inevitable, but also unpredictable when being applied to so many citizens of different cultures, economic situations, and everyday circumstances. This is exactly why the original form of our federal government was established in the very limited manner that it was. Limited government keeps the population safe from tyranny and greed in regards to resources, which we have battled for far too long. There are many egregious acts performed by our government, such as executive orders and mandates that don't even originate in Congress, which deliberately undermines our checks and balances system. It does not matter if you agree with the policy put forth by these illegal orders and mandates. They were not lawfully created. It does not matter if you agree with the policy put forth by these illegal orders and mandates. They were not lawfully created and therefore should be done away with immediately. You may instinctively want to point to a political party or elected official at some level to place blame for such illegal actions. You may instinctively want to point to a political party or elected official at some level to place blame for such illegal actions, but this is futile. Not only does picking a political party to defend in this conversation undermine the entire point of the discourse, it also serves to divide the people. Divide and conquer is the oldest trick in the book and yet also the most effective. We have all become so divided along political lines, race, gender, sexual preference, religion, sports teams, etc., that we fight amongst our own family and friends to defend our chosen group. This will eventually be our demise as a free society if we do not change very quickly. One of the first things that we must understand is why our government was created in the way that it was, and then we must identify how we got so far off track. First of all, our Bill of Rights is frequently misunderstood as a document written to inform the populace, we the people, of the rights that we have, when in all actuality it was written as a document to limit and control our government. We the people created the federal government to do our bidding and work for us in the manner that we intend. If it strays from this course, it is our duty to correct it. We the people did not create a government in order for it to dictate to us what rights we have, nor did we create our federal government to tell us what we can or cannot do. In fact, the Bill of Rights was written solely to inform the federal government what it could never, under any circumstances, take away from the citizens which it was supposed to be serving. It by no means even begins to list all of the rights held by the people. The people of our great country have all of the rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights, plus every other right imaginable, withholding only those which infringe on the rights of other citizens as outlined in our agreed upon body of laws. In other words, in a free society, you should have the right to do as you please as long as it does not infringe on the rights of other citizens nor inflict harm on other species. That includes such things as choosing not to wear a mask or smoking marijuana. This is also touched on in the Bible, Galatians 5:14, where it says that the whole of the law shall be summed up as, do unto others as you would have done unto you. This is also known as the Golden Rule, which I will attempt to expand on later. The 10th Amendment specifically says anything not enumerated in our Constitution would be left up to the states. This idea was specifically put into the Constitution and Bill of Rights of our federal government in order to allow for fluctuation based on differences in culture, agriculture, the economy, and other geographical changes from one end of our great country to the other. Our forefathers saw so long ago that the needs of every citizen would differ based on many factors and that our federal government would never succeed in creating laws for that diverse of a population that didn't hurt one or another part of the population in some way. This is why we use large numbers of elected officials in Congress to write our legislation. It keeps power spread out and decentralized. If at any time Congress enters into a situation where it is considering creating a law that might infringe on certain parts of the population's rights, it should at that very moment realize that it has overstepped its boundaries and should leave said legislation up to the states or possibly even a smaller jurisdiction. The number of laws and bills that have been created that do harm to one part of the population or another are almost innumerable. In the late 1700s, Thomas Paine wrote a series of letters detailing grievances about the government that we were fleeing at the time, as well as concerns for forming a new federal government. These letters were later compiled into a book titled Common Sense. These letters sound so similar and accurate to the issues that we face today in our government that they could have been written in modern times. In the book, he outlines several things, any one of which, if violated, would be grounds to reinstitute a new form of government that is of, for, and by the people. These warnings were meant to tell future generations the specific things to look for if our government had taken a turn towards tyranny and oppression. Our current government is not violating one of these warnings or guidelines. Our current government is violating all of them. The question is not if we should reform or fix our current government. The question is, how do we institute a form of government peacefully in which these problems will no longer arise? So we have identified the reason why our government was formed the way that it was, that being to protect the people from unintended consequences from broad and sweeping legislation, and also to avoid highly centralized power, which only results in tyranny. Tyranny, much like what we ran from when we fled England. Now we must understand how it got so far out of control. Many people believe that once we declared our independence from the King of England that we were left alone. On the contrary, our adversaries did not stop. They only changed how they fought. The goal for these people has always been to conquer and control the entire world. They are a small group and rely on division of the masses to maintain power. It's very simple. If you are busy arguing with your neighbor or your family, you are easy to control. I feed you information on a topic to make you choose a side and then promote the other side to your quote-unquote opponent. We can pick any topic to illustrate this, but abortion comes to mind. On the one hand, no one wants a baby to die. If I were trying to divide and control the people, I could assign that belief to Republicans. But what if the woman could die and should get to decide what happens to her body? I'll assign that viewpoint to the Democrats. Then you must choose, as a citizen, to either hate babies or women. Pick a side. In reality, this is none of your business, and every scenario will vary greatly from one instance to the next. It absolutely is none of the federal government's business. This is a very sensitive situation that should only be discussed between the mother and her chosen doctor and should be subject to doctor-patient confidentiality laws, not presented for public opinion. I do not envy anyone having to choose between taking their own life or a child's life. How horrible that must be. What it isn't is any of your business unless you are the doctor or the parents of said child. Our federal government doesn't have a say in it, period, because that's not what we created them for. It's time we reminded them who works for whom. Referring back to biblical text, wherein the whole of the law can be summarized as do unto others as you would have done unto you, I believe this can be expanded upon or refined by saying it in a different way. Treat every person as if they are you, and I would add that consent is everything. From a psychological perspective, you are only a reflection of the people and events you have experienced in your life. Your personality, habits, and actions are all essentially based on what you have seen, heard, or felt. Language is a prime example. Making noises with your mouth in order to communicate ideas is learned through experience. Without these experiences, you would never have come up with your native language. In this way, we are all basically mirrors reflecting each other's behaviors. According to Scripture, we are all made in the image of God. This, combined with the knowledge of learned or reflected behavior, would essentially make all of us the same entity, divided only to interact with each other in order to have the experience of life. If this was understood or realized on a large scale, we would not only be much more harmonious beings, but would also resist outside influence and control from negative or threatening sources. The powerful entities that have ruled this planet for far too long know these things and use them against the people at every level of society. Having a small group of people control such a large number of people is only made possible through division of the people being ruled. Those who control our government, the money, and by proxy the population, rely on this to manipulate the world into doing their bidding. In fact, they will use any means necessary to keep us divided along any and all fronts possible. As mentioned previously, they will use race, social status, income, religion, even going as far as to manufacture false situations to divide us on as many lines as they possibly can. This strategy, using the old adage divide and conquer, will continue to be used until the people refuse to be divided. Solving the problem of government corruption cannot come from violence, protests, or even trying to hold people who have participated in the corruption accountable. Pursuing these ends will only lead to more power being transferred into the hands of the oppressors, as well as more laws in order to govern the people. In fact, even trying to identify the corruption on a specific level will only lead to more arguing and division of the people. The system is designed this way. The more you struggle, the tighter the grip becomes, and the more suffering and death we face. Eliminating the amount of intrusion into our lives can only be done once we recognize the fronts we are divided on and choose to no longer be divided along them. Issues such as sexual preference, abortion, medical issues, marriage, and so forth are way outside the scope of our federal government and have no business even being discussed on that level. What people do behind closed doors is no business of any government at the local, state, or federal level as long as all parties consent. When it comes to healthcare, the government has no business being between you and your doctor in regards to your health. Marriage is a contract between two human beings and God. The government has no business meddling in this issue either. The list of things that our government is doing outside of its original scope is astounding. It seems that people have been fooled into arguing about these things from a political perspective rather than telling our elected officials to get back to what they were elected to do. In addition to these things, our elected leaders seem to have so little experience in the different aspects of human life as experienced by the majority of the population of these United States that it is nauseating. The majority of the time they create laws that affect huge numbers of people that have vastly different lives compared to anything that they are accustomed to. It is almost impossible for them to have empathy for anyone except for the very small portion of society they come from. This upbringing could be described as college-educated with the pursuit of politics as a career. None of them have the experience or understanding to come up with the legitimate solution to the problems that the rest of the people face in situations like poverty. Politicians, for the most part, have no idea what it's like to lead a typical American life. In addition to their ignorance of a typical American life, politicians seem to be the easiest people to persuade in one direction or another with nothing more than money. Serving the people and honestly understanding their constituents' lives seem to be the last thing that they are interested in. I think the cause of their inability to do the American people any good is the same cause of problems I am about to outline in other sectors of American life, but can be boiled down to money. Moving on to education. The opportunities available to get a good education are far better than they have ever been in the past. Access to knowledge in good schools has been improving steadily since the turn of the century and rapidly ramping up. Yet there is still room for improvement. There are core subjects that would greatly improve society that are completely overlooked for the most part in today's school system. I also believe that utilizing technology to further these ends is not only beneficial, but will also simplify the process, free up more time, and make the learning process more fluid and enjoyable for students and teachers alike. Removing government from the system as much as possible will also allow for better efficiency as well as speed for those who excel, while allowing more time for those who are slower in the learning process. Not to mention, it would end the tremendous amount of wasteful spending which pervades all school systems. Technology could easily be leveraged in such a way to record and broadcast lectures from great teachers. This will give access to much larger numbers of people at an ever smaller cost. Jordan Peterson has already begun to do this and is getting a lot of positive feedback while helping huge numbers of people who would not have had access to this type of information due to cost, time, and location. I personally attended woodworking masterclasses in a virtual environment for 30 months at a total cost of $450. Paul Sellers was my instructor and is possibly one of the best hand tool woodworkers on the planet and an excellent teacher for my personality and learning preferences. All at a tiny fraction of the cost to attend similar technically focused college courses. I am now very proficient at fine furniture making, but lack only the piece of paper to prove it. This is more than ridiculous when seeing what I can do would prove that I am capable. For 100 times the price, I could have attended an accredited university, learned the same type of things, and received a piece of paper saying that I knew it. This would have put me in a tremendous amount of debt. Obviously a bad thing for any young person, but this is happening all the time. This can easily be fixed by making a huge number of courses and lessons available virtually as pre-recorded videos in order to cut costs for everyone involved. Improving personality matchups between students and teachers would also make for a much more positive learning experience, whereas simply not getting along with the teacher could do real damage to an individual's ability to absorb knowledge. I have met very few individuals who have at least one teacher they hated or loved in one subject or another that drastically changed their lives from an educational standpoint. A simple personality shift between teacher and student could set people back or make them excel to a great degree. This could potentially change their educational perspective and experience forever. AI is possibly a way to marry certain teaching styles to students' learning styles across all subjects. Environment is another big factor that seems to make or break young students. I happen to be somewhat of a class clown at times, and this undoubtedly had an impact on those around me and their experience in the classroom. This obviously could be extended to bullying, drug use, sex, violence, and other things distracting students from their learning, culminating in a potentially bad learning experience. With the ultimate goal of being to give the most positive experience, our focus should shift solely to choosing the best teachers, the most relevant subjects, and making learning enjoyable. Once we have hit those goals and stopped with the focus on funding, life will get better for everyone. One subject that is not even touched on in school is horticulture and gardening. When trying to curb hunger and starvation worldwide, the most important thing to be teaching people in school would be how to grow and/or find food. If you're starving or malnutritioned, you not only have a tough time learning, but it's almost impossible to concentrate on anything until you've eaten. There are thousands of people in the U.S. alone that become adults and have jobs and yet don't know basic core essentials like math, English, etc., many of them becoming dependent on the state or church at some point for food. All people having the skills to feed themselves would be a huge benefit to every portion of society. In fact, focusing on how to produce fresh homegrown vegetables could curb many illnesses, as well as reduce the huge number of chemicals created by and ingested by society, ultimately creating a more healthy populace. More veggies grown at home would reduce the amount of goods needed to be transported, helping the environment and slowing global warming by reducing our carbon footprint. This would reduce the amount of chemicals released into the groundwater supplies and into the soil as well. Improving public health through a better diet grown at home would reduce the number of pharmaceuticals needed, reduce traffic, improve air quality, and keep people fed. I would say that the number of benefits listed here should be enough reasons to add this to our core curriculum. I would also say that all the things that are universally necessary to life should be taught prior to anything else, at least in terms of a value hierarchy. I will also outline a plan to give much more growing area to each household in the coming chapters. Contrary to this, there are many things that hinder the education process and seem to be rampant, especially around college campuses. The list of things that seem to be contrary to a smooth and positive educational process also seem to be the same problems that pervade our political system in the form of useless things to argue about. Issues such as sexual preference, political ideologies, and so forth have no place in education unless taught as a part of a specific course. Things like this are not only interrupting the educational process, but also disrupting entire campuses. This can be seen in confrontations between Jordan Peterson and student staff at Toronto University, as well as Brent Weinstein at Evergreen State College and many other places. These topics or subjects have so disrupted the schools that they have begun to institute free speech zones. This clearly subverts the First Amendment, which is the number one thing that is absolutely necessary to a free and open society. No entity should ever need such zones. Fixing this will require a higher level of respect amongst and between everyone on campus by keeping things that are supposed to be behind closed doors private. Things such as sexual preference have no place at school, and schools should never stop free speech. To be frank, all parties need to grow up and focus on the educational process of school and leave personal issues to a more appropriate time and place. Who you identify as at school should simply be teacher, staff, or student. Again, what you do behind closed doors and issues between you and your doctor aren't anyone's business as long as it is consensual between all parties involved. In short, we should return back to the core of what school is about and save things that are appropriate for other setting for exactly that. I have never enjoyed learning more nor retained more knowledge than when I wanted to reach a specific goal. Once we have more time and have integrated technology more effectively into the educational system, we will be able to take more of a free will approach towards education. This will hopefully allow everyone to use a goal-oriented curriculum in pursuit of knowledge and a career they will enjoy. Establishing goals that require learning will grab the attention of students unlike anything our current education system has seen. Not only will students find reason behind what they are learning, but they will feel a sense of accomplishment when they reach their goal, rather than only seeing a score on a report card. For instance, combining shop class and math class, you could use mathematics to design and tools to build things that could be sold to further the education programs of the school. For instance, design and build gazebos or sheds or even furniture that would equate to an apprenticeship that could translate into a career. In fact, math could be taught in a manner that would teach the accounting side of running a business as well. This would all set up people for a better entry into the world post-high school. By justifying all of the things that they are learning in math and directly applying them to what they will most likely be doing in the workforce. This would counter what seems to be the normal education people get when they are trained to be useful employees rather than how to function on their own in society. We can build an educated citizenry who would live up to their full potential, be more fulfilled with their work or lessons, and would be more focused on doing a good job rather than just getting a paycheck. My girlfriend is an 8th grade math teacher, and we designed and implemented a course for the children that would teach them how to measure and bid an entire roofing job. It's not an easy thing to do, but very beneficial to the kids in terms of them having the knowledge to start a business rather than become an employee right out of high school. This has now spread to bidding an entire remodel of a house, which the kids will not only figure all of the material costs and everything involved, but they will also be a part of watching professionals do the work. This in contrast to worrying about a grade on a report card, which I will show you as a form of conditioning, preparing students to enter into the workforce while focusing solely on a number on a paycheck. In the same way that you are looking for results on a piece of paper, rather than doing a good job in school, you also would gladly put in more hours of mediocre work just to see a bigger number on your check. This is why nothing is built to last and why children say, "When am I ever going to use this?" about their schoolwork. In short, we have boxed ourselves into a way of thinking about education and what it should look like to the point where we are overlooking very easy and beneficial ways to change for the better. This brings us to jobs and the workforce. I have never ran across a person in my days that has said they want to work their life away chasing a paycheck that never seems to be enough. Yet in today's job market, phrases like "you'll get your hours" are spoken all the time. In part, the reason why people don't get a good paying job is a lack of education. People are unable to afford a good education to pursue what they would like to spend their time doing, which results in them taking any job that they can. Their choice is made normally based on the highest pay they can find, rather than what they love to do or what they excel at. Normally, those two things are highly correlated. With money being the motive to go to work, the result inevitably becomes a disdain, if not outright hatred, of their daily tasks. This results in poor performance and poor attendance, or working many hours just to make extra money. If you work extra hours for extra money, you end up having no free time to enjoy the fruits of your labor. If you take the other route of doing the bare minimum, it usually results in no promotion or even being replaced. Neither scenario results in people excelling in their field because they aren't interested in performing for an end result of a job well done. Rather, they are only looking at a number on a check. This removes their focus completely from the task itself. This is very similar to, if not direct conditioning from the education system they were raised in. When learning the lesson for a reason or performing the job to the best of your ability ceases to be the main focus, quality is sacrificed in knowledge retention and or workmanship. Consequently, you end up with cheaply manufactured good, poor construction methods, and lots of waste. Poor performance and low quality goods and services can widely be attributed to focus being placed on a number. In my youth, I used to visit my grandpa's house, and my favorite thing was to go out into his wood shop and use his old hand tools. Tools that would have been considered hard labor to implement when they were used back in the day were now something I enjoyed as if they were toys. We made all kinds of things out in the shop. Using these hand tools and exerting energy kept me in shape and allowed me to make things that were not only built well but would last a lifetime. This was also a great way for me to express myself artistically. I was never paid for much of the work or time I invested, even moving into my adult life, but it was the most amazing feeling when I finished a project and people would compliment me on what I had created. It wasn't until I began creating digital artwork and selling it that I would ever feel this feeling again. Chasing a paycheck, working at restaurants, warehouses, construction, and other various jobs never even got me close to that feeling. At those jobs, it was always about the money. Even waiting tables, I found myself putting on a false persona in order to woo my customers rather than having a genuine interest in the work that I was doing for them. The jobs where the money was the motive, I was never able to look back and honestly say to myself that I had done the best that I could possibly do. On the other hand, I could spend 3 or 4 days cutting and splitting trees for lumber, a couple of years storing and drying the wood, and a few months building a project, and in retrospect, I would know that I hadn't skimped on materials or cut corners anywhere. It was the best I could do, and it showed. The results were outstanding pieces of furniture with a one-of-a-kind look that would outlast me. Today's furniture market consists of pieces that are made of inferior materials and will most likely end up in a landfill within 5 to 10 years or less. That could be said for most home construction materials inside and out as well. The economy is set up to run this way because the goal is money, not quality products. If we built furniture that would last a lifetime, they couldn't sell you a new product every few years. I think that these two problems could both be solved by taking a look at this from a different perspective. If people went to work to do the best job that they are capable of with the intention of never having to go back and do it again, we would be creating products that would last for generations, but the company would eventually put themselves out of business. I ask you, is that a bad thing? No one wants to go to a job that doesn't pay much money, doing a task that they couldn't care less about. I would suggest at this point that rather than trying to create more jobs that no one wants to do, we would start to eliminate jobs instead. This flies in the face of what most politicians and economists say. Most of the time they are trying to convince people it's a good idea that they are creating more jobs, but it seems to me that the more jobs they create, the less people like the work that they do, and the worse that the products they are creating become. Their only motive to create more jobs seems to be to give people enough money to buy more inferior products. It seems to be a self-devouring system. With today's technological capabilities, we could automate so many things that we can free up many people to do more useful tasks rather than stuffing them into a job for the sake of making a check. In addition to automation, making and building things to last would eliminate further jobs because things will not need to be replaced nearly as often. I think it would be easy to eliminate enough jobs that you could potentially get half the population to work half the time that they currently do and still fill every necessary position. Job creation to me seems like the most ridiculous thing we should be doing when all you need to do is drive around the country to see that there is plenty of work to be done. The problem is a huge number of people are doing things that don't need to be done in the form of make work. Even legitimate useful jobs at some point are filled with make work by the employer simply to get the employee the hours they need in order to make the paycheck they require to live. To sum this up, we are wasting huge amounts of time by having to redo things we've already done, due to using poor construction methods, inferior materials, or in the form of labor workers who don't have an interest in the final product. I believe focusing on freeing up time for the entire species in order to educate them and allow them to chase their dreams would be a much more worthy goal than the current one of creating work for the sake of work. We would see many benefits to humanity from this approach. We would live much more fulfilling lives, plus be doing things right the first time will save environmental resources as well. We will use fewer resources, transport fewer goods, as well as free up people to do things such as give back to society or further their personal goals in life. This would be a huge benefit to mental health. One thing to remember while we're trying to do this is that the more you waste, the more work you create. The better things that we create, the less work we have. If we really got rid of everything that we could live without and still live comfortably, there would be so few jobs that would be easy for us to alternate fulfilling the necessary tasks and get our workload down to something that we could split and probably half the amount of time that you actually spend working. I would be willing to give up a lot of things in order to not work my life away. In fact, if we were trying to create a new system where we focused on what we wanted the end result to be and then reverse engineered it to suit our goal, we could then split the workload and easily reach our goal with a feeling of satisfaction within our lifetime. This brings us to mental health and institutions. It's no secret that drug addiction is a huge problem in this country. It seems to be just as much a problem as mental health issues amongst the population. They both seem to be doing a great job of filling our institutions, mental health facilities, and prisons, and homeless facilities alike. There are many hypotheses as to what fuels these problems. From my perspective, mental escapism seems to be the main reason behind addiction and could very well be a contributor to mental wellness also. Drugs as a whole do serve a good purpose for humanity, but seem to be used for all the wrong reasons much of the time. This is especially true for pharmaceuticals, which people often overlook when they discuss people with drug problems. If you find a person who is addicted to street drugs, they will almost always use prescription drugs as well. However, many people who use prescription drugs that are prescribed to them do not believe that they have a problem because the drugs were prescribed by a doctor. My wife's son and I all raced motocross and supercross together. Prescription drug addiction issues were very evident in that arena. The people in this sport are highly religious and close with each other, even the competition, to the point of all calling each other family. Because of the danger to racers' lives and the expense of trying to pursue racing, it takes a lot of dedication to even get into the sport. In fact, a majority of the people in the sport homeschool their children in order to spend more time with racing at the center of their lives. It does not lend itself well to drug addiction or even drug use for that matter because it is an addiction all in itself. Even though the sport removes the opportunity to fall into the wrong crowd or become involved with street drugs almost completely, addiction is one of the worst problems faced by this community due to the inevitability of wrecks, injury, and consequently being prescribed painkillers. If an injury to a rider is race career ending, it often leads to drug addiction. This doesn't seem to be purely a chemical issue based on what I can tell. It seems more to be replacing something that they love to do and spend their time trying to be the best at with something that made them forget that they lost something they loved. This is one of a few gateways to drug use and addiction in general that seems overlooked frequently. A lot of people think that marijuana or alcohol are gateway drugs, but I don't believe that the gateway is met after using drugs. I believe that the gateway is prior to any drug use or at the time of first use. What I'm trying to illustrate is that much of society turns to drugs, even prescribed drugs, when they actually could solve the problem without them by changing things in their day-to-day lives. In other words, if you don't feel like you serve a purpose in the world that is meaningful, it is very easy to try to numb that feeling by using drugs or to even diagnose it as a mental health issue. In fact, many mental health issues could come from a lack of purpose in their day-to-day life and their mind not being able to overcome that feeling. I believe this is a very real thing and a huge problem for all of society when you consider going to work with money as a motivator for almost everyone's lives. Most of the people of this world go to work looking for a paycheck, which means they aren't fulfilling a purpose in their mind by the work that they are doing. This is because they are interested only in the bare minimum of work that gets them the largest paycheck. This leads to poor work performance, poor attendance, and a general lack of purpose. It is a terrible feeling. I believe this lack of purpose in life is the main driver behind mental illness and drug addiction. If you have your mind focused on something that you are interested in, you won't want to do anything that might hinder your work or cloud your mind. Conversely, if you feel you have no purpose, anything that will distract you from that feeling will do and will easily become your addiction. This addiction could be sex, drugs, alcohol, woodworking, working out, or anything else that will distract your mind from the feeling of having no purpose. If you follow this train of thought to its conclusion, it seems people will be addicted to anything. What people choose to be addicted to will depend on their hierarchy of values they create for themselves. Once an addiction to drugs or alcohol is established, the choice to get drunk or high will only be trumped by something that has a greater value in their mind than stopping the feeling of having a lack of purpose. Survival is a great example. If you were being hunted, you would need all of your faculties to survive and would reject anything that might hinder your escape. So your hierarchy of values would switch to staying alive as the number one goal, and using drugs would quickly be put on the back burner. In fact, many of the drugs in our society are prescribed as ways to avoid dealing with problems. This is especially true with pharmaceutical drugs. People go to the doctor and claim to have some sort of a problem, and the doctor's remedy for the problem is not to address the cause directly, but rather to mask it with drugs. The other way in which society looks at drugs as harmful is by putting them in a category where they are outlawed. Making something against the rules automatically breeds curiosity as well as gives people a natural dopamine hit when they feel like they're getting away with something they're not supposed to. By demonizing something and telling people that they cannot do any activity, it automatically breeds curiosity and pushes them closer to trying the outlawed thing, especially in children. This could be having sex or using drugs or doing any other illegal activity when they otherwise wouldn't have had we used a different approach in discussing it. These problems and the way we approach these things are exclusive to modern society. What I mean by that is there are no indigenous people with mental health or addiction problems until they are interrupted by modern people. The American Indian is a great example. They had used drugs for a positive purpose for thousands of years without addiction problems until people showed up with their government rules. The radical and unnatural behavior by these governments combined with force brought with it perspectives on alcohol and drugs in a different manner while simultaneously removing their natural way of life and harmony with the earth. It's about how we look at it and how we talk about it rather than if drugs are good or bad. Drugs can obviously be useful in many different ways, and if we change our perspectives on them, we would benefit greatly, but it will take a huge shift in our mentality. I imagine putting a much more spiritual connotation to drug use in the form of identifying the effects of each and using the benefits in a way that furthers another cause, similar to drinking a cup of coffee in the morning. For example, when having a serious debate where tempers tend to flare on both sides, marijuana could really benefit in the form of finding a reasonable, intelligent outcome without the fighting. Jordan Peterson describes a technique where both sides of a debate must be outlined by the opposition and agreed upon by both parties before a solution can be presented or worked towards. In practice, it works wonderfully from my perspective. Adding the effects of marijuana seem to keep things positive and lighthearted, even in deep conversations with serious consequences when combined with this technique. Many scientists have thought that mushrooms were a big factor in the evolution of our minds, expanding consciousness and giving new perspective to our way of thinking. These things are rarely discussed by the people creating policy when trying to decide how to approach drug use, because the money that is generated through the sale of drugs is used to buy the politicians and direct legislation. When it comes to prescription drugs and mental health, we need to identify why these things are happening rather than trying to mask them with drugs or write more laws to regulate or promote in the case of pharmaceuticals. It looks to me like you can pinpoint the exact time that any given population not only began to develop mental health issues and/or drug problems. When an indigenous population is overtaken by a tyrannical government, they lose their connection to the earth, their purpose in life, and then comes the mental health issues, and soon following, abuse and addiction to drugs. God and evolution is another topic I'd like to discuss. Regardless of evolution from a Darwinian perspective, i.e., the missing link and us coming from apes, it is undoubtedly the case that we evolve consciously as a species. This is obvious in our amazing technological advancements. However, our evolution did not appear to be completely positive in its nature. Rather, we seem to be the only species that evolved away from nature. We are definitely the only species who question our own existence and role on this planet. It is evident all around you every day. The great philosopher Alan Watts once said something like, "A squirrel does not question why he is a squirrel or what he should do as a squirrel. He just does what a squirrel does. He doesn't worry about his addiction to nuts, if he is having too much sex, or even if he spends too much time at play with other squirrels. He simply squirrels." In fact, there are no other species we know of that question any part of their lives. They don't question whether or not they are naked. They don't try to diagnose each other with issues. All other species simply live by the laws of nature, which were designed by the Creator. Every religion and every culture has its own way of describing the Creator and creation, but the differences are so subtle on a macro level. They are all trying to describe the same thing. The first thing that causes differences or division between one religious belief and another is simply language. Different languages cause confusion in meaning when trying to translate ideas from one to another. Different environments also influence beliefs heavily as well. Most of all, our own minds influence differences in religion. We focus on them and project them forth into the world, ignoring the fact that our cultural behavior and actions are mostly learned from what we see or experience. In other words, what we do and say influences the next generations more than anything. Natural, I repeat, natural drivers for behavior are few and easily spotted in humanity as well as other species. Food, warmth, reproduction, the need for companionship, and the need for shelter are all programmed naturally into life. The laws of nature, as they are called, weren't near enough for us. We apparently needed to stray from this simplicity and change the rules of life for ourselves until we've reached this crescendo of complexity with no apparent goal to reach and a majority of people not doing well in one way or another. It is spoken about in the Bible that all people are created in the image of God. I believe all creation is the image of God. This means God's plan is and always will be in action, and everything that happens was not only planned, but unstoppable. Everyone seems to be interested in trying to break this creation down and dissect it in order to understand it, which only seems to make what we are striving to understand more elusive, mysterious, and ultimately more complicated than it needs to be. This is evidenced in experiments like the double slit experiment and quantum particle behavior. Things appear to be a certain way until you try to pin them down and document them, and then they do something unexpected. What I think is the most important thing to realize when discussing religion and science is that they both are attempting to reach an explanation of the same exact thing. That question being, why are we here and how did we get here? The constant disagreement between the two fields of study only serve to further divide the population, even though they seek the same answers. Evolution theory and science simply have the advantage at the moment because their information seems to grow and evolve or make progress. On the contrary, the study only gets more complicated and progress is only documented or discussed once we realize there is more to understand than what we know. Religion has become somewhat stagnant and seemingly outdated in comparison to the breakthroughs of science. However, nothing could be farther from the truth, as we still search in a spiritual manner as well. Meanwhile, the clock keeps ticking and we are all missing the point of life, dividing everyone along as many lines as possible in order to seemingly make things more difficult on each other. The experience of life and love is what life is for. You don't need a large hadron collider to be completely fulfilled in life. Discovering or studying the building blocks of reality takes away from the richness and mysteriousness of life. Having said that, religion has undoubtedly been used in various ways to control and manipulate society for generations. It doesn't make religion bad, it simply means people are misusing it in order to gain an advantage for themselves. The fear of hell and promise of heaven, if you obey, either turns people away in droves or easily sways people into obedience when the real message is very simple and if followed would bring heaven on earth. or at least as close as we can achieve. Science and evolution theory, where breaking down and dividing existence into something smaller to understand it will never bring a sense of meaning to the world, nor will it give us an understanding that will be beneficial to humanity in the form of how to live. Notice how it is focused on division rather than unity. This is attempting to control things, people, ideas, our very conception of how to view the world. Yes, science is useful. No, it will not tell us what the meaning of life is, nor guide us in our conduct. It will only show us pieces of our ever-connected existence. Both science and religion are essential to us becoming a better species, but both must be regarded in their own right in accordance to what they bring to the table. The division of people must stop. The biblical teachings provide a moral guidance that cannot be derived from science. In other words, morality cannot come from an experiment. In fact, I believe what is taught in the Bible can be expounded upon by using love as our guide. This is, after all, what the main message is. Simply to love each other. The other teaching that is of the utmost importance that comes from the Bible is about law. It states that the whole of the law can be summarized into the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated. This is accurate, but does fall short to some degree. I believe with the evolution of language that it could be better explained by saying consent is everything. This gap in translation or lack of verbiage from our ancestors is an easy thing to understand. If you really think about it, we have come a long way really fast educationally. Joe Rogan said something in one of his comedy routines about how many people ago something happened, and that really struck me. 2,000 years ago, we were in the time of what we refer to as BC. If every person lived to be 50 years old since then, that was 40 people ago. Not much time considering how far we've come technologically. So we had to come up with a better way to convey the message of don't do things to people that they don't want you to do. Better yet, when everyone realizes we are made in the image of God and starts to act like it, we will all start to love the only thing we have, which is each other. Here is an Eastern philosophical view of what the Bible says. Since you are made in the image of God, you therefore are a mask of God, or at least a part of God. In some religions, God is referred to as the way or the flow, and you are part of it, which suggests that when you see someone else, that you are simply looking at a different version of you. Once you understand that our actions are then learned or mirrored to ourselves, actions and behaviors that we made up or chose to do, then you begin to see we can choose to do it differently and change everything for the better. Imagine standing at an extremely still pond and throwing a rock into it. The waves that travel out across the pond are similar to human activity in the world. Every time you act or open your mouth, you are sending out waves that affect the rest of the world, not just humanity. This means two things. One is that how you act in the world will be reflected in one way or another by everything else around you. And the second being, we can change just about anything really fast by throwing better rocks. Just as easily as we choose the current path, we could choose to love each other and make life easier tomorrow. We are all actors in a grand cosmic play set in motion by something in order to experience what we call life rather than experiencing nothing. The way I see it, we owe all of our praise to God or whatever you choose to call our Creator or what is. We all want pretty much the same thing when you boil it down. It's our loved ones and happiness. After all, you can't take anything physical when you're gone anyway. I imagine the world could consist of many more block parties and way less time at work if we were doing things right. Surely we all see the inequality and insane waste of resources and time. All the money and possessions in the world would be meaningless if we were here alone. Let's go get what matters and stop arguing about everything. Let's stop worrying if the economy is going to crash or even if we have enough money. Everyone getting the shaft in this system is at the bottom, and it just so turns out that they're the ones doing all the necessary work anyway. Makes you really wonder who's in the driver's seat. Is it the people running the show or the workers? Just remember that we could show love, keep working, never fight, or even raise our voices and move forward without anyone being hurt, and we can do it without money. We will get into this in the next section. Regardless of what anyone else says, when you're on God's side and acting like it, you can't be stopped. After all, the way we humans live and all of our rules are just a game we made up. Searching for a common denominator in our problems, you come up with money 99% of the time, at least from a scientific or mathematical analysis. Even trying to search for solutions to these problems religiously, I am always returned to the same exact cause. Money is the root of all evil. It also seems to be the most addictive thing that people have created. Society is willing to allow people they don't know to watch, raise, teach, and influence their children for most of every day so that they can chase money. They trade thousands of hours of time with their families in the pursuit of money. Arguing over money and how it gets spent has ruined so many relationships, it's staggering. It has caused more death than any other addiction or issue in history. Many intimate relationships exist or perish purely because of monetary circumstance. It is the determining factor in the environment your kids are raised in, the nutrition you get, the free time in your life, your level of education, and in medical situations, whether you live or die. It is the reason people sell drugs, why there is no cure for cancer, and is responsible for every burglary and robbery that occurs. It is the cause of modern wars. It is why we don't manufacture goods in the United States. It is why there are modern day and historical slaves, and why nothing is built to last. People often mistake the love of money as the problem rather than the money itself. When you think about it, the money automatically creates division amongst the people, and this story or contract is even written on the $1 bill. It creates a hierarchy and ultimately people who are willing to hinder the progress of the species simply to maintain their own position in the hierarchy. Your boss will never want you to be as good or better than he or she because you would threaten their position and consequently their paycheck. This is represented on the back of the $1 bill by the pyramid on the left as layers of division vertically. On the right, it is printed how we fix it. In other words, they show you a choice on the money itself, even describing how you are divided as a participant or user of said monetary device. The eagle on the right is extending an olive branch, which represents a peace offering, as well as a bundle of arrows, which represents the people standing together and refusing to be divided. We can really start to see where morality and guidance from the Bible are necessary when you imagine what life would be like if everyone was filthy rich. If every person had more money than they could ever spend in their lifetime, what do you think would happen next? I would imagine tomorrow everyone would wake up whenever they wanted to and would most likely take the day off. But that's pretty much all that they would do because no one else would go to work either. Therefore, there would be no place to spend your money. Then it starts to become blatantly obvious that work is necessary, but the money is not. In fact, money only works if you divide it up unevenly amongst the people. If everybody had the same amount, it suddenly becomes irrelevant to have the money at all. We don't need it unless we are going to divide it up unevenly. It says right on the dollar bill that it is our trust or faith in it that makes it worth something. This being the case, we could essentially print everyone as much money as we wanted. In fact, money is only a measure or number of units of what you are owed for goods or services rendered. Saying we don't have enough money to do something is like saying we don't have enough inches to build a house. They are both units of measurement. This is a man-made game that we have decided to play that you must participate in that creates division and inequity while we are simultaneously telling ourselves we are created equal in the image of God. That's the most amazing part about this game we're playing. We made it up ourselves so we can change it anytime we want to. It may seem difficult to think about, but it's only hard because you make it difficult in your mind. Money is attached to everything, so it's always a burden to everyone alive. But just imagine tomorrow that you got up and did everything that you did today, only you didn't exchange dollar bills when you did it. That would be an easy thing to try to imagine. We have been conditioned to think that we couldn't do that 2 days in a row or every day. This could be a difficult mind shift because most people are consumed with greed when they talk about equity or equality. This is why you need religion as a guide. Greed and jealousy is what got us here, and following our Creator's wishes is the only way out. There is a lot of talk of creating a universal basic income. I believe it is a wonderful step in the right direction, but consequences would be devastating to the economy if we allow them to be. It will soon thereafter become obvious that we should be putting in effort towards a common goal and eliminating any unnecessary work. If we can stop being divided, we could act similar to how a beehive or an ant colony works together in harmony towards a common goal with little to no waste and very little pointless activity. In short, removing money from the equation would appear to solve almost all of the problems humanity faces: drug addiction, disease, crime, corruption, waste, many murders, premature death, starvation, slavery, broken homes, etc., can all be stopped by curing this one man-made addiction. Putting resources and manpower to work solving actual problems of humanity rather than waiting on funding or wasting time making stuff that will soon be trash. It would also remove the control mechanism by which humanity has been subject to for thousands of years and give everyone a more satisfying and fulfilling life. People could pass knowledge freely without fear of losing their livelihood, which would allow everyone to advance in every field of study exponentially due to the volume of contribution to a specific cause alone. Think about how many people will be freed up to do cancer research or become astronauts or whatever they want, who were previously in a position that solely dealt with money. Bankers, stockbrokers, accountants, financial advisors, and anybody who works at a cash register. If we eliminated many construction and other jobs with better practices, we could easily free up half of the population. Salesmen would also vanish from existence. Dropping money altogether is a ways off if we don't start loving each other now, but understanding its control and grip over our existence should make us rethink putting it at the center of every aspect of our lives, ready to make or break you at any second. This shift will happen nowhere else but in your mind and in your heart. When you love the world like it is you and choose to spread that love, things will start to get better. In the meantime, I think spending our time trying to make things that last and create less work for ourselves would be a great change. Getting rid of unwanted occupations and splitting the real and necessary workload evenly sounds like a great step toward a better future. Simply seeing progress toward an actual goal is great motivation, and it also gives everyone a purpose in the world. Having something to aim at and look forward to, no matter what your role in this process, would be the most amazing thing to happen to humanity. Remember, anything is possible, we just have to aim at it. I completely understand that we're not going to get rid of money overnight, but the journey of a lifetime starts with a single step. If we put forth some of the ideas I mentioned in reference to the educational process, such as teaching people how to garden, how to raise chickens, who help great with bug problems, by the way, or other livestock in order to feed themselves, in conjunction with the infrastructure plan I'm about to outline, we'll be headed in a better direction. What if I told you that our houses could be tornado and hurricane proof? They could also be lightning, fire, hail, and flood proof. What if I told you it would cost less and help the environment tremendously at the same time? Building houses that were partially underground has all of these benefits plus more. Here is what I mean when I say partially underground. I mean building the foundation above the floodplain and bury all but the front of the house, creating a large mound rather than a hole as discussed in so many prepper type situations. Using steel reinforced concrete for all of the walls, floors, and ceiling, and then burying all but the front would eliminate a huge number of problems we currently face. Here is a list of immediate and obvious positive outcomes of said construction practices. 1. Using concrete walls and burying each structure would be so energy efficient that heating and cooling would almost be negligible without any insulation. The average temperature underground is 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Even in the heat of summer or the dead of winter, your energy usage would be low enough to use nothing more than solar panels for heating and cooling. In conjunction with LED lights, the carbon footprint of each structure would drop to almost zero. 2. Using unbreakable window materials and a front facade of brick or stone would make each home almost impenetrable to Mother Nature. Tornadoes, hurricanes, hail, lightning, wildfires, storms, etc. would pass right through neighborhoods with minimal to no damage at all. If the foundation was built up and the home buried using dirt from the outer edges of the property, you would also create huge amounts of drainage to prevent flooding. Very similar to the inner waterways in southern Florida. I'm from Kansas, and this would be a huge benefit. 3. Using dirt as an exterior to the home would save huge amounts of natural resources. No wood to create the walls, no insulation, no siding, no roofing materials, no plywood or OSB. Every time there is a hailstorm in Kansas, siding, windows, roofing materials, guttering, and much more are destroyed. Tornadoes and flooding cause much more damage. These materials are then removed by the ton per each residence, carted to a landfill, landfills which are growing at an unprecedented rate, and then replaced. The amount of fossil fuels used to just create these new materials and ship them around the country is astonishing. This would be one of the most environmentally sound practices we could engage in, not to mention eliminating jobs that keep us spending our lives working rather than doing the things we would like. 4. Asphalt roofing and exposed concrete in the form of roadways and parking lots are huge contributors to atmospheric heating. Ask any roofer and they will tell you how much hotter it is on the roof than in the grass on any day. This is also evident in any parking lot when it's sunny. Asphalt roofing is exactly the same in respect to the amount of atmospheric heat reflection and retention as a parking lot, if not worse. Not only would we eliminate the materials needed, but this would decrease energy used to cool the home and reduce energy reflected back into the atmosphere, helping to reduce global warming. This is most likely a much larger contributor to global warming than CO2, but this plan remedies both just to make sure that we've got all of our bases covered. By the way, CO2 is the best thing for plant life, which convert carbon dioxide to oxygen. Dispensaries with grow operations all use this technique of injecting CO2 into the grow rooms to get better results when growing marijuana. If atmospheric CO2 levels were rising in a significant way, it should be evident in the local plant life prior to, or at least in conjunction with, increasing average temperatures globally. In other words, if CO2 was increasing in any significant manner, all flora of all kinds would love it and you would see it in the plant growth patterns. 5. The amount of money required per household on repairs and insurance would drop to almost nothing. In fact, every home would cost so much less to build and maintain than owning a home would be very affordable to most American families. This would also free up huge amounts of time for people to spend with their family in the form of needing to work fewer hours at a job or performing property maintenance at their own home. 6. Covering the house in dirt would also return much of the landscape to a natural and beautiful environment, helping all of the biome. Wildlife would no longer be pushed out of neighborhoods, and it would also provide a much larger area per household to grow food or keep livestock. 7. Not only could you eliminate the threat of things like drive-by shootings, you could also make it much more difficult for any foreign or domestic entity to invade and conquer our country. Every home would essentially become a fortified bunker in case of any emergency, natural or otherwise. This includes protection from re-entry of space junk or other small debris coming from outer space. With the amount of money and materials saved on the structure in this plan, it would be very affordable to outfit homes with bulletproof glass and an exterior facade if necessary. 8. Fossil fuels needed to get materials harvested, refined, and moved from point A to B to C and D, etc., would be reduced by an enormous amount. This was touched on but deserves its own mention separately. Just to get one 2x4 to market requires felling equipment on a massive scale, a truck to haul raw logs to the mill, a massive saw to cut the logs down into boards, a kiln or furnace to dry the wood quickly in order to satisfy the high demand market, another truck to move it to the desired retail or wholesale location, and yet another truck to move it to the construction site. That is if you are as efficient as you could possibly be in this process. It may take a ride on a container ship as well. You still then have to replant what you have harvested. It is ridiculous the amount of energy to get one stud grade pine piece of wood of the lowest quality to a construction site, all while removing the tree from the equation. A tree which could be used to be removing CO2 from the atmosphere and converting it to oxygen. You don't need to be a scientist to see how preposterous this is. Removing this practice would reduce traffic on the roadways, as well as reduce a huge amount of the fuel required for our country to operate. Growing food at home would also contribute to this reduction in fuel consumption in a huge way. In short, this plan would be extremely energy efficient on most levels. protect from almost anything the Earth could throw at us, as well as many of the man-made threats, reduce atmospheric heating on a massive scale, provide for a much more area to be used for agriculture, return much of the environment to its natural state, reduce consumer costs on many levels, save people huge amount of time, reduce the workload on humanity, reduce the number of required building materials, and consequently the impact on the global environment. And it would protect us from physical threats, foreign and domestic. Using building practices that will truly withstand the test of time and Mother Nature is tantamount. Think about it like pulling Earth's blanket up over you. Everything we need to make our lives easy and wonderful is here if we just utilize it correctly.